I started this journey because I wanted to see for myself. It all started 2 years ago while I was trekking through the Himalayas in Nepal. I got to these very remote areas where the Sherpa people lived off the land, fairly secluded, away from the buzz of society. It was all so fascinating. I remember thinking, I wish there was something like that in Canada. And then I remembered there is, but I'd forgotten. There's a whole culture of people in Canada that have been completely isolated. The Aboriginal people. It was then that I decided I had to see what it was that we had forgotten about. You see, I'm just a regular Canadian boy, a millennial who is trying to find his purpose in the world. But with that comes the bigger question. Our purpose. What our purpose as a collective human species is. As many hipster millennials are, I'm environmentally conscious. I care, or at least I think I do. However, the way I see it, if we as a human species don't clean up our act, Mother Nature is going to eradicate us. And if that happens, then there is no point, which is a depressing thought. So I wanted to go find these Aboriginal people. I feel like our relationship with them is like our relationship with Mother Nature. Forgotten. Growing up, I learned about the Aboriginal people's connection with the land and relationship with Mother Earth. I had also heard about some of the renewable energy projects that they have been doing, so I wanted to go see. I wanted to learn from them, to reconnect with Mother Earth and this forgotten culture, to learn what they have to teach us about reducing our carbon footprint and how to move forward in the 21st century. We took off from Ottawa Airport at 7 a.m. I got to sit right next to the landing gear. When the tires left the ground, I had a million thoughts come over me. I had no idea what to expect. What would I find? What would I learn? So now I'm here on a plane to Thunder Bay, Ontario, and then to Fort Frances to find out. Is it a true representation of an isolated community? No, but it's a taste. It would at least give me some sort of an idea. I was afraid I would not be welcome, afraid they would shut their doors, afraid that I might be going up there for nothing. You see, relations between us colonials and the Aboriginal people have been strained. It has been prescriptive. We're always telling them what to do and telling them what's best for them. But this was different. I was going to have them tell us what was best for us. The truth is, we have screwed up this planet so bad I felt it was our turn to learn. I felt like the teenager who stole the car and driven it through the living room window and had to now go to mom and dad and own up to it, what I have done. I guess I'll do what the flight attendant over the PA says. Buckle up, put my seat and tray in the upright position, and enjoy the flight.
Seated with your seatbelts fastened and your hand baggage safely stowed. Your seat back must be secured.
The first person I called was Bruce Hyer. I got his contact information through this lovely lady named Rebecca Aird, who I met at a conference the week before. Not knowing much about anything, I called him up. I was greeted by the warmest and most welcoming voice and chatted with him for some time. He was a godsend. He helped connect me with his wife Margaret Wanlin and invited me out to see him the next morning. It wasn't until after I got off the phone and Googled his name that I realized who I had just been talking to. Bruce Tolhurst Hyer is the deputy leader of the Green Party of Canada and the former member of Parliament for Thunder Bay, Superior North. He was elected in the 2008 federal election and re-elected in the 2011 federal election as part of the New Democratic Party. He was born in Connecticut, where after graduating university, he helped create the Connecticut State Department of Environmental Protection, working on water and air pollution, land use planning, and was in charge of pesticide registration, where he played a role in banning DDT and many other chlorinated pesticides, and ended the spraying of non-selective chemical insecticides in unmanaged forests. At 29, the age I am now, he moved to Canada to live in the wilderness. He lived for 2 years mostly off the land. First in a teepee, and later in a log cabin he constructed himself. In 1978, he moved to Thunder Bay, where he started a retail, outdoor, and camera store and married Margaret Wanlin, another very inspiring person who has been active on multiple fronts in northwestern Ontario. In 1995, they gave birth to their son Michael, who is very passionate about Aboriginal reconciliation and active in Victoria, British Columbia. Bruce was definitely someone I had to talk to. I was especially intrigued about his decision when he was the same age as me to give up his life in Connecticut and come live in Northern Ontario off the land. I had to know more. What inspired you to give up the life you had in Connecticut and live off the land? What attracted you to it?
Well, when I was 29, I was in charge of most of the environmental programs for the state of Connecticut. And I had a great job and it paid well, and I could have had the pension and the gold watch and the whole 9 yards, and my life was planned out the way most people's would. But there was a problem, and that was when I was 4, I read lots of books about living in the wilderness, and when I was 5, I told everyone who would listen that I'm going to move to Canada and build a log cabin in the woods and live off the land and be a bush pilot and a trapper and a wilderness guide and a biologist. And they patted me on the head and said, "Oh, isn't that sweet?" So I told so many people over the years I had to do it.
What were the major takeaways from those 2 years?
Well, some things were very basic. Can I get this fire started? Can I dry myself out after I've gone through the ice and almost drowned at 40 below? Can I get enough firewood? Can I catch this moose that I need desperately to get through the winter? Can I really sit by this trail frozen and hungry for 3 days until the moose finally goes by? So it had that aspect to it. But it also I didn't see, despite the hardships, and there were hardships, some, I didn't mostly find it hard. There was a native guy in New England a long time ago who did some writing, and he wrote under the name Old Nessmuk, Nessmuk. And he said, "I don't go to the woods to rough it, I go to smooth it. I get it rough enough in the city." Well, I mostly don't find, sure it's buggy, sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's wet, windy, sometimes you're threatened by a forest fire. But I find the boreal forest calming and tranquil, not usually an enemy, it's your friend if you go with the flow. And I've always been fascinated by Aboriginal people and hunters and gatherers.
How plausible is it to live off the land and have First Nations people live off the land today?
Aboriginal people, at most, they could get about a week's worth of food. And so it was a different society. It was a live for today society. But also in the boreal forest is a very low productivity ecosystem. There's not lots of what biologists call net primary productivity, which is the amount of food that green plants produce. In the boreal forest, most of that food goes to insects and the birds that eat those insects. The largest animal biomass in the boreal forest is the little tiny warblers that live in the top of the trees and eat the insects. So it's my experience, and it's borne out by some science as well, that it takes about 100 square kilometers to support one wolf or one human in the boreal forest. So if we're going to be hunter-gatherers in the boreal forest, we are not going to be living in cities. We're not even going to be living in large tribes of 2,000-3,000 people. We're going to be living in small groups of hunter-gatherers. So I think it would be a shame to lose that cultural knowledge of doing that. We may need it again someday. I don't know if you share my thoughts, but there's a thin veneer on civilization.
I know we can't go back, but what will happen if we don't change our ways?
I don't believe, and many other biologists also don't believe, that we can have 7, 8, 9 billion people and have a biosphere that's sustainable. The planet will survive. Many species will survive. Rats and pigeons and cockroaches and ants will survive. But I think it's a real good question today whether civilization or perhaps even our species will survive. We're really clever, high-tech chimpanzees. We are. But our technological skills don't seem to be matched by our social and political skills, and that's quite worrisome. I have a simple but not easy formula for what I think we need. The most important word in my vocabulary is diversity. Every kind of diversity, cultural diversity, language diversity, artistic diversity, sexual diversity, for me are unbelievably important. And so I hope that some people choose to remain hunter-gatherers, but we have to make room for them. I also hope that at some point we decide, as E.O. Wilson, the famous Nobel Prize winner, has said, that we need to have half the planet as a nature reserve, a series of nature reserves. Every kind of aquatic ecosystem, every kind of coastal ecosystem, every kind of freshwater ecosystem, every kind of terrestrial ecosystem, we should be setting aside as nature reserves half of it, and then on the other half living as sustainably and smart as we possibly can. There are several reasons for that. Civilization is an experiment. We don't know yet how it's going to turn out. I'm a little worried about it, as you can tell. What do we need to do to save civilization and the planet, and what happens if we don't? Well, I've developed two formulas. I'm a simple guy, really. The smart people in my family are my wife and my kid, but I have the odd thought. Here for me is the bottom line. Ecosystems minus people equal ecosystems. The planet will go along quite nicely without us. People minus ecosystems equals, drum roll, Mr. Interviewer, nothing, zero. Yeah, people, and I don't think most people realize this. Some people are starting to get a glimmer. Many urban people today are scarcely aware of nature. I have a rhetorical question I ask people, and I'll ask you. How big is a mosquito? How big is a butterfly? How big is an ant? And how big is a great blue whale? And how big is a polar bear? I can't play the game very effectively in our format here, so I'll give you the punchline. And the punchline is that they're all the same size on the TV screen. So urban people have this detached view of nature, idealistic view of nature. I think they have a detached view of hunter-gatherer people and Aboriginal people too. It's all quite theoretical. And so the further north you go and the further into the wilds you go, the more I think people still have some understanding of how we're linked to the land and what that really means. I don't think the average person in Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal or New York or Chicago or Hamburg really thinks about very much, if they even understand, that all of their food, all of their nutrients, all of their energy, all of their raw materials come from the wild. And also, when they produce wastes, healthy waste or unhealthy waste, whether they're biodegradable or not, it's nature that biodegrades them. The atmosphere, the water, they have a certain capacity to recycle nutrients. But if we overload the system, it fails. I don't think the average urban person understands that. Every single day, I thank nature. I thank farmers too, because I like agriculture too. But there are limits to everything. This is a finite planet. There's a certain amount of irrigation that we can do, a certain amount of water we can draw, a certain amount of nutrients that we can use, a certain amount of oil, a certain amount of CO2 that the atmosphere can absorb. It's not a matter of going to zero. Anybody who says we're going to get totally off oil in the next 25, 30, 50 years, I think is being quite unrealistic. But we can reduce it hugely. And there must be a level of CO2 emissions, I'm assuming, because there have always been CO2 emissions, that nature can deal with. It's a matter of finding what's staying within the tolerance limits and saying no to ourselves.
Having gone through everything that you've gone through and taking everything that we've talked about today, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give to young people?
Well, I have two reasons for hope. One is my theories of pessimism may be wrong, and I've been wrong before, so maybe I'm wrong this time. But I am a bit surprised and pleased and encouraged by the fact that today many young people are saying enough is enough to uncontrolled greed. And they're living a simpler lifestyle, more minimalist lifestyle, a lifestyle with less money, more friends, more collaboration, more music, more arts, more culture, more fun, more outdoor activities. They're getting fitter again. And they ride bikes and hike and rock climb and soar and hang glide and surf and also work on social action programs, environmental programs. So I'm 71. I don't know whether I have 2 years or 20 years to go. But I do think that young people are going to have to get politically involved. Now, that's one drawback to young people. They're so discouraged with politics that they don't get involved in it. But we need young people to get involved politically as well as culturally. But yes, I am encouraged.
Wow, what thoughtful discussion, and what a kind and warm welcome to the Great White North. The next stop was the Thunder Bay Indigenous Friendship Centre. It was one of the original 6 friendship centres in Ontario, founded in 1964. Their mission is to develop a sense of Native community in the city of Thunder Bay. They work to increase opportunities for local Aboriginals to gain access to services such as education, skills development, housing, justice, health, and social services, among many, many other things. But most importantly, they work to provide guidance for First Nations individuals who are leaving their home and coming to the city. Many of them come from these remote communities with no identification and sometimes no proof of birth. They have no bank account and know nothing about how to live within Western society. Some of them are young teenagers who have come to Thunder Bay to complete their high school diplomas because the reserves don't teach past grade 8. When they get here, they've never taken a bus or seen a busy street because they've only ever lived in flying communities. It was hard to imagine. The only way I could try and understand was if I pictured myself making the opposite journey, leaving my warm and cozy family home in southern Ontario at the tender age of 13 and being dropped off in a community that was only accessible by plane, with little to no running water, not speaking the language, and just expected to figure it out. It was through this lens that I was able to truly appreciate what the Friendship Center was doing. We were greeted by warm smiles and happy faces. You could really feel the friendship aspect of the place. Their finance director, Cindy, was gracious enough to give us a tour. You could tell that she really cared about what she was doing and wore it proudly. She took us from desk to desk to desk, explaining every service that they offer to the community, each service seeming as big and important a task as the next. She brought us downstairs and showed us the kitchen, learning center, computer room, and other facilities. We met an active member named Margaret, a middle-aged woman who had been coming since she was 14. You could tell that it was a second home for her. After our tour, Cindy took us to her office to give us a lay of the land. I felt that there was so much that I still didn't understand. She recommended that we check out a local documentary called The Walk a Mile Project, and recommended that we talk to Magiskan at the City of Thunder Bay's office of the Aboriginal Liaison. So we looked up her information and went to the public library to borrow the Walk a Mile DVD. We watched it that night. While watching the documentary, it became clear to me that this is a must-see for all Canadians. It does a great job of telling the untold history of our relationship with the First Nations people. It became evident that there were much larger issues that had to be addressed. The elephant in the room. I felt that it would be a disservice to do a documentary without discussing it. So yes, we're going there. We're going to talk about the elephant in the room. Because if we don't, we can't move forward. And that's the intention, to find a way forward. But before we look forward, we have to take a moment to look back. To understand how we got here. It turned out Magiskan played a pivotal role in the creation of the Walk a Mile documentary, and has even helped develop a curriculum around it. Lucky for us, we were able to arrange an interview with her the next day.
The Walk a Mile Film Project was an opportunity to take people backwards in time to understand what has transpired to Canada's First Peoples from that point of contact to where we're at today. And to be able to do that through a documentary that focused on people in Thunder Bay. And so, you know, in sort of their understanding of Canada's First Peoples history. So out of the Walk a Mile Film Project, after we brought it to the community, it was very well received in February of 2014. And then from there, we worked in partnership with curriculum developers to say we really need to look at potential curriculum to go with the film. The film is great as it stands, but it's to create conversation. And so part of the curriculum development was to enable us to use curriculum to start those conversations. And in actuality, when we think of the Walk a Mile film, it's challenging conversations because we're really looking at history and sort of what has happened to Canada's First Peoples. Having been working and have worked in our community for going on 30 years, you know, you start to unravel sort of and understand sort of what all of these things from the point of contact and how they continue to affect us today. Especially when we think about residential schools and their impact on First Nations people today. It's got a lot of coverage, and a lot of people don't really have the information, the education piece that goes along with understanding why this was harmful. It's an opportunity to break down preconceived ideas or misconceptions or biases that people have that are so ingrained in us as people walking in society today. It's an opportunity to break down some of those barriers and those walls and to just have an honest conversation. One of the exercises that we utilize in the Walk a Mile film, facilitated training sessions, is prior to watching the film on the Legacy of Struggle, the section of the film that's called the Legacy of Struggle, which focuses on an understanding of the residential schools in the 60s scoop era. What I do with the group that I'm facilitating this discussion with or facilitating the conversation with is I try to flip the script a little bit, and they become the First Nation community that is potentially only accessed by plane. So there's no road access. And so they become that community. And I try to put them in the role of a parent. And so, you know, we do a little bit of a role play exercise where they're the community and they have a child, and I've given them the opportunity to name their child, give their child an age. And then I usually request the participants to bond with their child. And it's interesting to see the different responses. It gives them an opportunity to really reflect on what it would feel like to have your child taken, and without you having a say whether or not that child can be removed. So then the role that I play, or my co-facilitator plays, is the role of the agent, who then rounds the children up to prepare them to leave the community for education, to be sent away to this residential school where they're going to live for the next 10 months, and in some cases for the next 16 years, depending on if they're coming home. The facilitator then becomes the agent who takes these children. The reflection that we ask the group to have after we remove the children is who's left? Who's left? And you'll get the usual responses of who's left. Parents with no children to parent, except for babies. Adults or grandparents with no children in the community. Now picture that over how many generations it happened for. And then we get to an era of time where now the government has determined that we don't make good parents as Canada's First Peoples. But again, it's an opportunity for people to reflect on how do you parent when there have been children to parent for how many generations? What I've seen through my own observations of doing these facilitated discussions is people starting to understand what it would feel like to have a community with no children's voices for 2 or 3 generations. We see families struggling. We see, you know, high rates of social issues that tend to be compounded for Canada's First Nations people. Not all, but certainly a large number of them. And I think that, you know, we tend to forget as a society that these things have been done. So one of the things, and it was a teaching that was shared to me by my predecessor actually in this role, where I received the teaching of the eagle feather. and that I've also incorporated something that I share with young people, that you're a warrior walking in two worlds. And so when we look at this eagle feather, there's two sides to the eagle feather, and the spine that's in the middle of that eagle feather. And if we were to take that eagle feather and look at it, and look at one side of it being, this is all the things, and start to check off, what are the things that are true to our First Nations people of Canada? What was the things that we lived through, the lives that we had pre-contact? How do we live off the land even after contact? We still did a lot of that. And so start to do that on that eagle feather, and start realizing, recognizing, we dance because we're dancing to the heartbeat of Mother Earth when we dance to that drum. That's one of those sections on that eagle feather when you look at it from that perspective as an Indigenous person, or a First Nation person, or Canada's First Peoples. On the other side of that feather, then we can tick off maybe other things that affect our lifestyles, whether it be, spirituality or religion that we follow, and then we tick off sections off of that. And how do we bring both of these sections into balance? Let's not rant about something we don't know anything about. Let's first understand potentially what happened. So education is key to sort of laying that foundation, to understanding Canada's history, accepting it, and then moving forward and not repeating those same things that we've done is very important. So the role that I see as somebody who does these education training sessions, and the sort of thought that I leave with a lot of my participants at the end is, I've just planted a seed. It's only going to grow, and it's only going to bloom if you choose to water it and feed that seed more knowledge and more understanding. That's how we move forward. We need to understand what has transpired in Canada, accept that it's happened, and then ensure we don't repeat those things moving forward. Really important for us as community to work towards building that stronger foundation for the generations that are coming behind us. Through our teachings as First Nations people, we can share that, taking care of the earth. And so one of the teachings that I've recently shared with my granddaughters is, when we go out for walks in the spring, it's our role as humankind, or as mankind, to clean up the messes that we've left behind. And so in the spring, we tend to recognize and acknowledge as human beings that it looks pretty dirty out there. And so we've made a decision amongst our family that when we go for a walk in the spring, whether it's to a gymnastics class or where it is, we're going to take a little garbage bag, a little grocery bag with us, and we're going to pick up garbage on the way. And my granddaughter, the very first time we did it, she looked at me and said, "Grandma, why are we picking up other people's garbage? I didn't throw this here." And my response was to her was, it's all of our responsibility to ensure that we pick up the garbage that we've all left on Mother Earth at some point in time, to ensure that she can breathe and continue to give us the things we need to sustain us as human beings.
Wow. There was a lot more to this than I had anticipated. It never had occurred to me how our past actions had deeply affected the Aboriginal culture and left them scarred. I came out of that interview with a lot to contemplate. I realized that the view of they should just be able to figure it out that I had heard so many times before is very naive. To relate it to experiences that I can identify with, I felt like this point of view is kind of like asking a person with depression to just feel happy, or a person with anorexia to just eat. It's more complicated than that. Their issues are a result of the experiences that we created for them. having a further understanding of the history helped put things in perspective. I was especially touched by the teaching she shared with her granddaughter to pick up in the spring. Her granddaughter was right. It isn't our mess. But as Anne, the loving Anishinaabe, or Ojibwe women, taught us, whether it is our mess or not, it is our responsibility to clean it up. It is our duty to Mother Earth. With these teachings, I decided to find a good example of a First Nations person or community who is working to help us find our way forward. A few weeks ago, I had met Jordy Kakapitam at a solar installation tour near Ottawa. Jordy is the Chief Executive Director of Kiiwetinoong Okimakanak. Kiiwetinoong Okimakanak, which means Northern Chiefs in Oji Cree, is a non-political chiefs council serving Deer Lake, Fort Severn, Keewaydin, McDowell Lake, North Spirit Lake, and Poplar Hill First Nations. The organization is directed by the chiefs of the member First Nations who form the board of directors. Through its close awareness of community needs and its team approach, the council advises and assists its member First Nations. Through his work with the Northern Chiefs, Jordy has helped bring internet, electricity, and water to the isolated communities that he represents in the north. Through his efforts, each of his communities, which are off-grid, has installed solar systems that feed into their microgrids to offset the power required from their diesel generators. I wanted to know more about these off-grid communities and what he's been doing to help. Unfortunately, we weren't able to meet with Jordy on camera, but we did talk to him off camera, and he had a lot of really interesting things to say. Jordy was a really inspiring man, and he inspired me to go find another project called the Rainy Rivers First Nations Project. So we packed our bags and headed 4 hours away to our next stop, the Rainy River First Nations community. Located in northwestern Ontario, Rainy River First Nations is an independent, well-run, hard-working community that is positioned for success. It is an amalgamation of the 7 historical Rainy River Saulteaux bands: Bishop, Pasconkin, Little Forks, Long Sault 1 and 2, and Manitou Rapids. These 7 communities along the Rainy River were amalgamated in the 1960s. In 1997, the Chief and Council formally adopted a mission statement for the leadership and staff to pursue in managing the organization. Their mission is to act as a leader in the establishment of self-sufficiency and self-government for its membership, to serve its community without limitation and provide assistance however possible. Their philosophy is that self-sufficiency and self-government can be achieved by working together. They believe that they must respect their elders, believe in their youth, and most importantly, believe in themselves. They believe that the members of the Chief and Council and staff must commit themselves to the community members and maintain a close relationship with them at all times. They believe that the organization reflects traditional values by respecting and recognizing the membership's needs, growth and autonomy, respecting nature and each other, and respecting the spiritual beliefs of each individual. They believe that the organization at all times must support the needs of the community members to get jobs, long-term security, and live in a community that is safe and healthy in order to bring their children and grandchildren to a high standard of living. We were greeted by their newly elected chief, Robin McGuinness. Robin had served on the council for 14 years and previously worked as a teacher in the local community. One of his first comments was about how he already missed the kids. You see, Robin had a close connection with the kids in his community because he had been a part of watching them grow and develop in his years as a teacher. He admitted that he was a little nervous in his new position. He had big shoes to fill. The previous chief, Jim Leonard, had done so much for the community in his many years as chief. But Rob seemed like the right guy for the job. With his connection to the kids in the community and the nomination from the previous chief, Jim, Rob was ready to give it his all. After a short chat in his office, Rob took us out to the 25 megawatt solar farm that Jim had brought to life. Through my work, I had seen several solar installations in the past, but I was not prepared for the sheer scale of this project. As we drove up, I was blown away by its size. Row after row after row of solar panels that went almost as far as the eye could see. It was a sight to behold. Rob went on to explain that the revenue being generated from the project was being invested back in the community. He talked about how the project had allowed them to pursue community projects that they would not otherwise be able to pursue, an example of which was the repatriation of buried artifacts on their lands that were excavated during an archaeological dig that happened in the 60s. An elder in the community had had a dream that these artifacts needed to be returned to their home, so true to the Rainy River's mission, they supported this effort. To learn more about this initiative and other initiatives that had come as a result of this solar project, Rob took us to talk with Tara Montague at the Kay-Nah-Chi-Wah-Nung Historical Center.
My name is Tara Montague. I'm the administration manager at Kay-Nah-Chi-Wah-Nung Historical Center. That's where you are right now. We are actually in the former Long Sault area. This was a former reserve that was taken. So we'll talk about that, I'm sure. As the administration manager, I oversee interpretive tours, year-round tours. We have a restaurant. We have guests from all around the world. And we also now are hosting a number of projects that we're able to support here at the mounds. So not only are you in a former reserve, you're actually at Manitou Mounds. So when I use the terminology Kay-Nah-Chi-Wah-Nung, that's actually the Ojibwe term for meeting place of the Long Sault. People used to come here year-round, but they would gather here in the spring and sometimes in the summer, and they would bury people here. So we have what is known as the largest concentration of burial mounds in North America. And I guess the thing to add is, above and beyond being an administration manager, I'm a caretaker of the land and of the mounds themselves. So everything that happens here, we have to make sure is as the community wants. So Rainy River First Nations is a pretty progressive and also apparently a pretty good business. They run a lot of businesses, 9 of them. We here at Manitou Mounds are one business of the 9, the solar project being another. So if you think of us as all kind of 9 businesses, the revenues from some can maybe offset the lack of revenues from another. So everyone knows in Canada, having interpretive centers and museums, it's not for profit. You're not making money, and in fact, you're usually going really deep. So because of the success that Rainy River has had with their other businesses, even the solar, it really offsets our operations here, and it allows it to be possible, because truly, without that money, this place would have been closed, I'm sure, at least 12 years ago. It's been slated over and over to be closed, but because the creativity just keeps inspiring and the passion to preserve culture is just so through the community, they take that revenue and they can offset our operating costs, which makes it really great to be working in a place that makes things possible, to have a budget. Our community is proud of what they have here. You got brought here right away. A lot of people get brought here right away. We're very proud. There's a lot of pride that comes here to say that we're owned and operated, have staff of 15 community members working here in the summer. You can't put a price tag on the fact that you have 15 community members working here, serving the public. So, yeah. As a result of the economic prosperity that we have given the solar farm, I describe it as our pet project. Sometimes we get to do things that maybe other people only wish they could do, because we have a really supportive chief and council, and we have the funds. So some of the pet projects that we have here at the mounds, the most successful was a 4-year trust project. And when I say a trust project, that means that Rainy River First Nations takes their enhanced budget, and their enhanced budget comes directly from that solar. So that solar money comes and the trust pairs it up with other money. And so with the winter project, we were able to offer 4 years of funding for kids to come snowshoeing, skiing. They do interpretive trails, tours, and we go through the trails. We look for animals. We just do some traditional teaching. Beaver skinning always comes to the top of my mind. So that was funded directly. That program now, because of its success, we actually don't receive funding anymore, and now it's operational. So we can move away and say, thank you, it's just part of our daily operation. So they gave us that kickstart that we needed. A second project that started under my direction and with the community direction was we call repatriation. So very close to what's happening, the reconciliation movement. We were funded by, again, that trust as well as the Rainy River First Nations enhanced budget to be able to go out to institutions around North America and essentially find our past So piece by piece, find out where the artifacts went, where the human remains went. There's been a lot of excavations, and so a lot of it is just a fact-finding mission, contacting institutions, seeing if they have things that relate to the community, and then essentially starting the process of bringing them back. That at first it's a highly emotional project, as you can imagine. So the trust and the support that we have through the enhanced budget is really important. So we're in our second year, and I know a lot of communities can't do it without it. So that's for sure. And thirdly, now a new project that we're looking at again is actually retracing the history of the river itself and working with a known author on developing a book about telling the history, not of the people of Rainy River First Nations themselves, but the river and the history along the river, which really involves multiple communities, Ojibwe, First Nations. So those are the types of activities that we can do. We have fun. It kind of goes like this. Solar money gets divvied into 33, 33, 33. So 33%, is my understanding, goes right back into community enhanced budget. I've used that budget in the past for training, for heritage interpreter training, culinary training. I know other program people, they apply just as a community member. Maybe you have someone that doesn't play hockey, maybe they play violin, maybe they are a really talented artist. So that money is designed to actually support the community, those extras, the enhanced budget. Out of the solar money, another 33% actually goes back as solar payments to the community, and that happens twice a year. So the profits are redistributed to people. Often they're encouraged to offset the hydro energy costs, because obviously hydro in our First Nation community is just, we're not even going to get into the hydro issue. So it's encouraged for community members to take that solar payment and offset their own utility costs. And sometimes it's quite nicely timed as well, that you can get one right before Christmas. So that it helps. I see it helping, and I think a lot of people are really proud to be able to use that money in a good way to help their families. And then the last 33% goes right back into the vortex of economic development, which I have no part of, so I don't know what happens with it, but they're just reinvest and look at new ways to obviously new economic development opportunities. So the projects that I refer to is that 33 portion that I can go in and tap into as a program director. Other program directors are encouraged to do it. I believe they can do things like just a community trip. Maybe everybody wants to go on a community trip, or maybe we want to write a book. Yeah. So kind of fun.
Leaving that interview with Tara, I was filled with hope. As we packed up and made the trek back home, I had a feeling of optimism and respect. There clearly was much that we could learn from our First Nations people around the environment, around community, and around respect. So, at the end of it all, what did I learn? Well, it's hard to really put into words, but I'll try. What I learned was that we are all one people. We all share this land, and we must all work together to care for this planet. I think the teaching of the 7 grandfathers, an old Ojibwe teaching, says it best. To cherish knowledge is to know wisdom. To know love is to know peace. To honor all of creation is to have respect. Bravery is to face the foe with integrity. Honesty in facing a situation is to be brave. Humility is to know yourself as a sacred part of creation. The truth is to know all of these things. You see, Aboriginal people came from a deep tradition of living off the land, and their old ways that were more environmentally conscious have been forgotten by Western society. However, with new technologies and innovative projects in the renewable energy space, perhaps there's hope to return to these old traditions. Perhaps the ways of the old that have been forgotten can once again be rediscovered and remembered. Perhaps the Aboriginal people can be a catalyst in this new space and help us all rediscover the lessons of old. A return to a more environmentally conscious, simpler time, but leveraging new and innovative technologies to live self-sufficiently off the land once again. Perhaps things have come full circle, and we are remembering the great wisdom of the Aboriginal people again. At the end of my journey, I learned it's not about us and them, and not about what we need to do for them and what we need to learn from them, but that we're all one people in this together. So what's the way forward? At the end of each interview, I asked the participants what their message was to others. I think they say it better than I ever could.
So get out in nature, enjoy your friends, enjoy nature as one.
You need to be able to love yourself, to love others.
My time here and the time that we spend investing is going to pay off, as that our youth will have the capacity to take over the jobs when we want to retire. So I think my message is investing wisely and sensibly. It does pay off, and we're living proof of that. So.